Now, children, in your previous classes, you would have studied about the characteristics of living things and non-living things. And by now, you would have understood the difference between living and non-living things. Now, before that, let us just recall that living things show few characteristics. Like we say living things grow, living things respire, living things move from one place to another, living things need food, and many other characteristics. And we also can include one more very important characteristic, that is, living things reproduce. So now all of you would have heard of the word reproduce or reproduction. So this is one of the most important characteristics of any living organism. So what is the meaning of reproduction, or what do we mean by saying reproduce? So reproduction is nothing but it is the production of new organisms from their parents is called reproduction. Now, how is this reproduction helpful to us? First thing, it helps in the propagation of species. That is, it helps in the process of creating new plants and animals. The second one, it helps to maintain biodiversity and balance of nature. Now, what do we mean by the word biodiversity? Can you see the word there, biodiversity? It refers to all the variety of life that can be found on the earth. It could be plants, animals, fungi, microorganisms, etc. So all this forms the biodiversity. So because of this process of reproduction, we can maintain this biodiversity on the earth, which is very, very important. So what is reproduction and why is reproduction important, or how does reproduction help us? So this is what you should understand from this slide. Now let us recall the various parts of a flowering plant. Now most of the plants have roots, stems and leaves. Now the root, the stems and the leaves are called the vegetative parts of a plant. Now after a period of time, once the plant grows, most of the plants will bear flowers. You would have seen this. After a period of time, they start bearing the flowers. Now once the flowers are produced, after that you would have seen a fruit arises from this flower. Now from this fruit, whatever we do, we enjoy this fruit, and sometimes when the fruit is eaten, you would have found seeds within it, right? And you throw the seeds somewhere in some place, and from those seeds, the germination takes place and new plants are formed. So, what do you think is the function of the flower? What role does the flower play in the plant? So, the flowers perform the function of reproduction in plants. And that is why we say flowers are the reproductive parts, or the flowers are the reproductive part of the plant. So now in this lesson we are going to study about the different modes of reproduction in plants. So plants, there are several ways by which these plants produce their offspring, and basically they are categorized into two types: sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So now I've told you plants can reproduce asexually and sexually. Now, what is the basic difference between asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction in plants? Now, when I say asexual reproduction in plants, it means that the plant can give rise to new plants without seeds. Meaning what? It means that a new plant I can get from a stem. Example, when we talk of the rose plant, very simple example. So to get a new rose plant, I can just cut a portion of the stem and I can plant it. A new plant will grow. So that means it does not require seeds to produce a new plant. So simple, you have to understand the meaning of asexual reproduction. Whereas sexual reproduction, here new plants are obtained from seeds. Say for example you have the mango plant. What do? You take the mango seed, allow it to germinate and then allow it to grow. So we need seeds over there. I cannot just take a cutting, put it and make a tree out of it. So basic difference you just understand. Sexual reproduction, if I want a new plant, then I will obtain it from seeds. Then that means sexual reproduction. So now in this chapter, we are only going to deal with what is the meaning of asexual reproduction and the different methods by which plants reproduce asexually. So now let us discuss the different ways of how plants can reproduce asexually. So asexual reproduction, the type of reproduction in which new plants arise without the formation of seeds. So here we are going to talk about 4 types of asexual reproduction. So the first one is vegetative propagation. The second, budding. The third one, spore formation. And the fourth one, fragmentation. So in the next few slides, we will discuss about each and every type of asexual reproduction. Okay. Now let us first discuss about the first type of asexual reproduction, that is vegetative propagation. Now, what do we mean by vegetative reproduction? So in this type of reproduction, new plants will arise from the vegetative part of the plant. When I say vegetative part, it is the stem or the root or the leaf. Now in the first picture on that slide, it is the picture of your potatoes. Now this potato, in the potato plant, the food is stored in the stem. Okay. And on these stems, the stems or on these potatoes, they bear vegetative buds. Vegetative buds, or you can see on the picture they have marked it as eyes. EYES. This will give rise to a new plant. Now similarly, you look at the next picture which shows the picture of the bryophyllum plant. Now this bryophyllum plant is also called air plant, A-I-R, air plant. Here the leaves of the bryophyllum are very broad, okay, and new plants can develop from the leaf buds present along the margin of the leaves. You just look at the margin of the leaves from where you can see those plants over there. So in the margin of the leaf, you will find what is called leaf buds. So later on, what will happen? These new plants which start growing from the margin of the leaf, they get detached and they develop into a new bryophyllum plant. Okay, so this is another example of vegetative reproduction. And in the next picture, of course, you have the rose plant, where you will get a new rose plant with the help of the stem of the plant. So this is vegetative propagation, by which few plants reproduce in this method. Now, vegetative reproduction in the rose plant. I have already told you this can be done by just using a cutting from the stem. And this is one of the most common asexual propagation technique which is suited for herbs, that is small plants and house plants. So this is very suitable for such plants. So you usually cannot grow big trees, huge trees by this method. Here what we do is we take a section of the stem from the parent plant and we are going to create a new plant. So you take it, you just bury it in the ground, or you can just keep it and you leave it for a few days. After a few days you will see that the roots are all produced and the plant starts to grow. And there are many other plants like the grapevine, sugarcane, banana, etc., which can be propagated by cutting. And one more very simple example which I can give you is the money plant, which you can try and keep it at home. So this actually, if you keep just a small cutting of the money plant in your house in a bottle of water, even that starts growing in your house. So these are the various ways by which plants can reproduce vegetatively. Okay, so now we'll go to the next type of asexual reproduction. Now we have already learned about the tiny organisms called yeast. Now this yeast can grow and multiply every few hours if sufficient nutrients are made available for them. So these are single-celled organisms, and these yeast can reproduce by the method of budding. Now let us try to understand what is the meaning of budding. So the reproduction which occurs through the formation of buds is called budding. Now here, in the first picture, you can see the picture of the yeast cell. Now in the next picture, you can see a small bulb-like projection which is coming out from the yeast cell. Can you see that? So that is the developing bud. It's called the developing bud. Now gradually this bud develops and the nucleus, that dark brown portion, just splits. That's called the nucleus. It splits and enters and it gets detached into the cell. it gets detached into that outgrowth, and slowly what happens is the bud which gradually grows gets detached from the cell, from the original parent cell, and it forms a new yeast cell. So the new yeast cell grows, matures, and produces new yeast, grows new yeast cells. So this continues to happen, and you have a chain of buds being produced and a number of yeast cells being produced. So this method of reproduction, which is seen in the yeast cell, is called budding. Now the next method of asexual reproduction is spore formation. Now what is the spore formation? Now as you have already studied, you know the meaning of the word fungus. Or I can give you a very simple example which you would have also tried at home. That is, if you keep bread piece outside for a long time, you take a piece of bread and you keep it out for a long time, say after 4-5 days, you can see a layer of mold or fungi that's grown over it, right? So this reproduces by the formation of spores. Now what are these spores? You see the picture on the slide. The spores are stored in sacs called sporangia, and when that bursts open, you will have these minute single-celled thick wall structures called spores, and they can be distributed by either scattered by rain, wind, or insects, and it will start growing wherever there are suitable conditions. So this is called spore formation, which you find in the fungus. So they reproduce asexually by this method. Now you would have seen these ferns, F-E-R-N-S. Ferns, these are plants which have leaves which are very, very thin, and they are small plants. And we have already discussed about moss, M-O-S-S, moss, the greenish kind of algae which you find. Yes, and they are very slippery. They look like velvet. You would have seen this. So these plants also reproduce by formation of the spore. Are you understanding? So what are these spores? Now I told you it will burst open, and see how the spores are released. So once the spores are released into the air, they keep floating in the air. And these are asexual reproductive bodies. And each spore is covered by a hard protective coat which can withstand all unfavorable conditions. That is, whatever is maybe high temperature or when it's extremely cold, it can withstand all these unfavorable conditions. And these spores will germinate into a new plant only under favorable conditions. Are you understanding? So for spore formation is another method of asexual reproduction which you will find in the fungus. You will find it in the moss, the ferns, the fern plant. So these are the few examples which you just have to remember and understand. Now the next method of asexual reproduction is called fragmentation. In this type of reproduction, a cell will break into 2 or more fragments or into pieces, and each of the fragment will grow into a new organism. So this is fragmentation. Now Spirogyra is a kind of an algae present in freshwater habitat such as ponds, lakes, etc., and they exhibit this method of reproducing by fragmentation. Now if you carefully look at the picture on the screen, you can see that it is made of unique spirals. It looks like spirals over there inside, which contains chloroplasts, and the cell contains chloroplasts in them, and this algae can prepare its own food. So it is called Spirogyra because of this unique spiral chloroplast which is present in it. So what happens? This is a algae which keeps floating on water, and the strand will grow. As it grows, sometimes they start breaking until they break, and once they break, the broken piece will start growing into a new individual. Are you understanding? So this is the meaning of fragmentation. So this is exhibited by Spirogyra, which is a kind of algae which is present in fresh water. So by now you would have studied the different ways of asexual reproduction by which plants reproduce. So the first one was vegetative propagation. The second one was budding. The third one was spore formation. And the fourth one is fragmentation. So you need to remember these four types and which are the plants which exhibit this kind of reproduction. Now children, let us summarize the important points from this lesson. All organisms multiply or reproduce their own kind. In plants, there are two modes of reproduction, sexual and asexual. In asexual reproduction, plants can give rise to new plants without seeds. In sexual reproduction, new plants are obtained from seeds. The methods of asexual reproduction in plants are vegetative propagation, budding, fragmentation, and spore formation. So these are all the important points that you have to remember, and you have to remember all the examples that are given for the different types of asexual reproduction. Now children, try to write the answers for this assignment. The first main is fill in the blanks, where we have the first one, production of new individuals from the vegetative part of a parent is called dash. Bryophyllum can reproduce by its dash. Answer the following. State main differences between sexual and asexual reproduction in plants. List the different methods of asexual reproduction in plants. Thank you children. Have a good day.